Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm your host, McKenna Campbell, and I thank you all for joining us for this evening's presentation, Cannabis and Industry and Cannabinoid Testing with Dr. Julie Johnson. Throughout the event, please feel welcome to send us questions in the chat box, and we will have a Q&A at the end. Before introducing Dr. Johnson, I would like to share a little about the association. ACS is an international association of healthcare professionals on the forefront of cannabinoid medicine. Founded by physicians, ACS is uniquely positioned to advocate for the highest standards in the practice of cannabis medicine. We are an advocacy organization striving to guide lawmakers and regulators at every level of cannabis control. We also prioritize inclusivity and value having members from all walks of life, which motivates us to provide donate what you can memberships to qualifying groups. Additionally, student memberships are free. Please contact us directly if you have any questions about how you can get involved. And then on this next slide, you can see that there are many benefits to joining ACS. For all of ACS's constituents, we provide evidence and experience-based education and resources to support the premise that cannabis should be treated like medicine. Certainly, feel welcome to reach out to us with any questions about membership opportunities. And for our student leaders, we encourage you to learn more about our Student Ambassador Program. Then ACS is also a nonprofit organization, and so we do rely on donations to continue our work. We appreciate any level of giving, and you can support us directly through the QR code or website link as listed on the slide. Kelsey, if you want to throw that link in the chat, just in case anyone wants it, that would be great. And then now I am delighted to introduce Dr. Julie Johnson. She is the Chief of Research at the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Cannabis Control Commission, where I'm lucky enough to work with her. She is also the co-chair of the Cannabis Regulators Association's Medical Program Subcommittee, former National Institute of Health National Research Service Award Fellow at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health and Brandeis University Heller School for Social Policy and Management. She also graduated from Simmons College with a BA in Society and Health, Sociology, and Communications, Brandeis University with a PhD in Social Policy, and completed her postdoc in the Drug Dependence Epidemiology Training Program at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. All that's to say, welcome, Dr. Johnson, and we are all very much looking forward to your presentation.
All right. Well, thank you for having me. I can hopefully now I might not have issues or I might.
Let's see. You're going to pass the baton now.
All right. All right. We got this.
Go.
Okay. Can you see this?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Slideshow. And go back a minute. Everything okay?
Perfect.
All right, so let's get started then. So thank you, Dr. Tischler and McKenna, one of our amazing investigators, for inviting me to come present today. I'm always excited to discuss and hear different unique perspectives on the applied research work we do, such as testing of all cannabis and cannabis consumption products on all the legal market, which directly impacts, as we know, the health and safety of all of our patients and consumers. So hi again, my name is Julie Johnson. I have led the Massachusetts Cannabis Control Commission's research department since 2018. The agency itself is tasked with regulating both medical and adult use cannabis legalization in our Commonwealth, whereas my team and I are responsible for conducting research and monitoring outcomes of cannabis legalization in our state. So we're not part of the regulating responsibilities necessarily, but we do have a front row seat and can help guide evidence-based policy from the ground level. So let's get started. So the mission of the Cannabis Control Commission is to honor the will of the voters of Massachusetts by safely, equitably, and effectively implementing and administering the laws enabling access to medical and adult use cannabis in the Commonwealth. Before we really dive in, let's take a look at the early beginnings of cannabis legalization in Massachusetts. Back in 2012, Massachusetts constituents voted and approved medical cannabis, which was followed by a similar vote to approve non-medical or adult use cannabis legalization in 2016. To take you back and give you a sense of the timeline of these processes, especially since dealing with a still federally illegal substance, it's not like a state's constituency votes and instantly everyone in that state has equal access to grow, purchase, consume cannabis. It's not that simple, although we wish it were. Even though adult use cannabis legalization was approved and technically legal in 2016, the agency that would become to regulate these laws wasn't established until 2017, and the first legal adult use stores were not operational until 2018. So why the wait? To stand up a brand new industry, especially one that's still federally illegal with no federal guidance, is complicated. There's first the legislature that writes and enacts the laws, as you can see, the multiple laws we operate under in the first set of bulleted points. Next, we as a regulatory agency write and promulgate the regulations under these laws, which are the legal rules for the industry to operate within. Lastly, our agency also provides comprehensive guidance and FAQs to guide the industry on how to be compliant with all laws and regulations, which often change in this fast-paced industry that is cannabis. Just a side note, if there are any lawyers listening in here tonight, you may understand these processes much better than I do. While the research department gets a first row seat to the regulatory processes, this is not the work that we do as a research entity within the agency. So when it comes to cannabis laws in modern society, cannabis policies preceded the science in what we collectively understand about adult use legalization and its varied impacts. Understanding this conundrum, the legislature actually wrote both one-time research mandates, including an assessment of THC potency and alternative tax schemes, as well as ongoing and annual mandates into the law. The legislator wanted to be careful and ensure policies are science-led in the future. So since 2018, the Commission is legally required to report on research priority areas to understand the social and economic trends of cannabis in the Commonwealth, to inform future decisions that would aid in the closure of the illicit marketplace, and to inform the Commission on the public health impacts of cannabis. Critical for evidence-based policymaking and ensuring the safety of legalization, the law also empowers the research department to make recommendations for further research and or policy changes as appropriate. This slide lists the specific metrics included in the annual mandate pursuant to Mass General Law 94G, Section 17. These are deemed important for the legislature, as testing is part of the overall public health impacts, as well as monitoring of the regulated and unregulated markets. It is a critical part of our research mandate. So thanks to the support of the Commission's new executive director, Director Travis A. Hearn, we are currently in the process of restarting a long dormant priority, which is the establishment of an official state-sponsored cannabis research center within the Commission. This center is going to be called the Center for Cannabis Research and Policy, and will allow us to be able to take in and give out grants, expand upon the work we're currently doing, and more importantly, collaborate with diverse stakeholders, such as you here tonight, to help facilitate critical research on cannabis, expanding to hard scientists, as well as the social impacts or social science that we do now. So operating within a cannabis regulating agency, the research department and soon to be research center conducts, funds, and disseminates applied research to inform evidence-based policy decisions to ensure safe, equitable, regulated cannabis industries. Our mission is to really help cannabis research come out of the silos and bring stakeholders at the local, national, and global levels together to comprehensively assess policy and address the varying outcomes of cannabis legalization and regulation. Since 2018, our department has served in both external and internal capacities. From an external perspective and in fulfillment of our research mandate and more, the Commission has published and are co-authored comprehensive reports, which include both legislative and special topic reports, scientific papers and conference abstracts, textbook chapters and white papers, and similar to this presentation, external guest lectures and panels. Obviously, my favorite part of this job. From an internal perspective, the department continues to be an objective body within the agency to provide evidence-based guidance and consulting for commissioners and leadership, including literature searches and reviews as topics of interest arise, content consulting and presentations, data analysis and visualizations, and survey construction. Massachusetts was the first regulatory agency to create a research department within the agency. And now a lot of other states have actually jumped on board, which has been fantastic. But since 2018, the Commission's research department has organically become a thought leader in this space, in the applied research space, assessing research topics and metrics that continue to guide evidence-based policies and practices, and collaborating with researchers and various stakeholders across the Commonwealth, as well as nationally and worldwide. Our external roles in leadership now include serving as a policy editor for Cannabis, the Research Society of Marijuana's scientific journal, and guest editors for other scientific issues on cannabis policy research specifically. Again, co-chairing the Cannabis Regulators Association, or CANRA's medical use subcommittee, and serving as a member of the Council of State and Territorial Epidemiologists, or CSTE, and specifically playing a lead role in the CSTE Marijuana Subcommittee's International Cannabis Policy Study. We also serve as research collaborators and consultants to various stakeholders, including fellow legalized states, researchers, and other state agencies whose work overlaps with our own. This is just a glimpse into some of the exciting activities that we do that highlight how Massachusetts is leading in applied cannabis research, work that will hopefully help ensure sound policy, including medical protections for patients, economic protections for equity applicants, and public health and safety monitoring and assessments to ensure a safe marketplace, to name a few. What is often helpful to external parties is the substantial data we provide transparently on our website. These data can be used by researchers to policymakers to journalists alike. I know testing data isn't included yet, but our Director of Data Analytics, Dr. Marianne Sarkis, and esteemed staff are busy at work to accomplish this goal. So what does open data look like, and what data can be extracted from the site currently? The three main categories of data we currently provide are agent registration and ownership, applications and licensing, and sales and product distribution. I know it's really small here. I've included some of the prepackaged graphics on the platform, although I know it's really small and I do apologize there. The first graphic shows the racial ethnic makeup of the cannabis industry workforce. As you can see, the yellow bar shows registered agents that are white in comparison to other racial demographic groups that make up the Massachusetts industry. The second graphic here shows marijuana establishments that have submitted all required application packets. And lastly, the third graphic shows the year-to-date sales of all adult-use marijuana retailers. These are just a few of the prepackaged visualizations available from our website. I would encourage anyone to go on and play around with the Tableau interactive graphics if interested, and stay tuned for testing. So now I'm going to switch gears to discuss some of the biggest public health concerns related to regulation of safe cannabis products, cannabis and hemp policies, and safety testing. First, let's take a contextual step backwards again. Why am I even talking about hemp, cannabis, and cannabinoid testing? Sorry, Dr. Tischler, I know this is high level, but hopefully helpful for those just turning in for the first time. So these topics matter because cannabinoids, like THC molecules, interact with the human body, specifically the endocannabinoid system, a critical system in the human biology that wasn't even discovered until the late 1980s by Dr. Raphael Milcom, who is considered now the father of cannabis research for his novel contributions to science and medicine, understanding these topics. Basically, and as this slide shows, the endocannabinoid system plays a role in regulating a range of functions and processes in the body, such as sleep, mood, appetite, memory, pain, immunity, stress response, reproduction system, muscle formation, as well as cardiovascular and liver functions. This system in all of our own bodies is comprised of endogenous cannabinoids, or cannabinoids that naturally occur in the human body. Cannabinoid receptors in the proteins that transport, synthesize, and degrade endocannabinoids. Each time an endocannabinoid binds to a cell receptor in the endocannabinoid system, it communicates a specific message, giving your cells specific directions. So there are two different kinds of cannabinoid receptors throughout the body, the CB1 and the CB2, as this slide demonstrates. CB1 receptors are primarily found in the brain and central nervous system, whereas CB2 receptors are found in peripheral cells outside the brain and central nervous system, and mainly expressed in our immune tissues. So cannabinoids are biologically active compounds found in the cannabis plants and human body that bind to cannabinoid receptors, as we just discussed. They are further divided into endogenous, phytocannabinoids, and synthetic cannabinoids. Endogenous cannabinoids are those naturally produced within the human body, such as anandamide. Phytocannabinoids, also naturally produced, but within the cannabis plants, such as tetrahydrocannabinol or vinyl or THC, as we all know. Overall, there are over 500 known phytocannabinoids found in the Cannabis sativa plant. Lastly, synthetic cannabinoids are manufactured and do not naturally occur in the plant or the human body. And this is where a lot of the policy, health, and safety concerns stem from today. THC, as we all know, is the predominant psychoactive phytocannabinoid that contributes to cognitive effects, potential medicinal effects, and also, and unfortunately, substance use dependence potential. So present within the cannabis plant is Delta-9 THC at higher concentrations, and its isomer Delta-8 THC at much lower concentrations. An isomer such as Delta-8 THC is basically the same compound as Delta-9 THC, but has a slightly different arrangement of molecules, which differentiates them. THCA, or THC acid, is the non-psychoactive acidic precursor to THC, which is found in greater quantities in hemp versus cannabis. Cannabidiol, or CBD, is a major cannabinoid that is non-psychoactive, but has anti-inflammatory and antioxidant effects. Also, just as a note to add to the confusion, we often see people describe CBD as both psychoactive and non-psychoactive, depending on whether they're using the term psychoactive to indicate something that affects your mental state, like caffeine does, for example, or something that gets you high, like THC. CBD can attenuate the high from cannabis, but it does not get a person high on its own, and it does not appear to have addictive or habit-forming potential. The distinction between hemp and cannabis has become a top policy issue since the federal 2018 Farm Bill that legalized hemp, or cannabis sativa, with less than 0.3% Delta-9 THC. But anything over 0.3% Delta-9 THC is still federally illegal, which has highlighted some really growing concerns with hemp versus with cannabis regulation and enforcement. So both cannabis and hemp belong to the same species of Cannabis sativa, and both contain a multitude of different cannabinoids, including CBD and THC, the most well-known chemical constituents. But these differ in their chemical compounds and effects, as well as practical uses. On the other side, cannabis can come from 3 standard varietals, including Cannabis sativa, Cannabis indica, and Cannabis ruderalis. Hemp is a specific variety of Cannabis sativa selectively bred to produce minuscule levels of Delta-9 THC with a standard threshold set at, again, less than 0.3% Delta-9 THC dry weight to distinguish hemp from cannabis in the Cannabis sativa plant varietal specifically. It is harvested for many uses, including the use of hemp, I'm talking about, is harvested for many uses, including the use of stock for textile fibers and biomass. While hemp has low concentration of Delta-8 THC and Delta-9 THC, it has several other chemicals that can alter bodily states, most notably CBD, the non-psychoactive component. So CBD can be obtained from both cannabis and hemp, but hemp naturally has a lot more CBD than THC. In most cases, manufacturers use the leaves and flowers from the hemp plant to make specific products such as CBD extracts. The confusion around hemp, cannabis, and novel cannabinoids is very real and has very real and large implications for consumers, industry, researchers, and lawmakers alike. For example, Delta-8 and Delta-10 are other isomers or variants of THC in cannabis, which can also produce highs. However, because these isomers are not part of the federal definition of marijuana, products containing them fall outside of the regulations and are sold even in states that have not legalized cannabis. Again, this is due to the 2018 federal Farm Bill. In regard to THCA, the federal law is typically understood to mean that a cannabis plant is considered marijuana, not hemp, and is therefore illegal if it contains more than 0.3% Delta-9 THC, including any THCA that will decarboxylate or convert to THC over time. Delta-9 THC volume is typically very low in the plant prior to heating and drying. Flower that is sold to consumers will advertise its total THC contents, which includes the current amount of Delta-9 THC and the amount of Delta THCA, the acidic precursor. However, some argue that federal law refers only to Delta-9 THC currently present in the plant, not including THCA, which will almost certainly decarboxylate into Delta-9 THC prior to consumption. This is fairly obviously not the intended meaning of the new law, but this argument does introduce confusion and difficulty for consumers, regulators, public health professionals, and law enforcement alike. So the Cannabis Control Commission regulates medical and adult use cannabis only, not hemp or hemp-derived products. Hemp and novel cannabinoids products are often marketed and labeled very similarly to cannabis products, but are not regulated with the same safety standards. So cannabis products adhere to regulations around testing, packaging, labeling, taxation, and age restrictions. Hemp products do not have these requirements, creating two markets for cannabinoids. Hemp is regulated by the Massachusetts Department of Agricultural Resources, or MDAR, and supported by the Department of Public Health, DPH, and other local boards of health. Actually, in May 2024, MDAR and DPH actually released a notice stating that food and beverages containing hemp-derived THC and or CBD were explicitly unlawful in Massachusetts. However, some of this is likely to change with the new bill just introduced by the House in June 2025. This Massachusetts House Bill, House Bill 4206 or House Bill 4187 prior to the amendments, is called an act modernizing the Commonwealth's cannabis laws and would impact legalization and regulated cannabinoid hemp in Massachusetts. So hemp-derived edible products would still be illegal, but there would still be allowance for hemp-derived beverages to be sold in liquor stores in Massachusetts. This would then fall under the regulatory purview of both the commission with close collaboration with the Massachusetts Alcohol Beverages Control Commission, or the ABCC. So the bill is now with the Senate jurisdiction, but stay tuned for more changes in this fast-paced novel cannabinoid industry, because I expect things to probably be a little bit different in the next year. Okay, so I want to switch gears for a moment and take a look at information. Take that information and try to translate why it matters for applied research. Because cannabis remains federally illegal, there is a state-by-state patchwork of testing and safety policies, which creates an opportunity for public health researchers to use regulated industry data to study and compare them. Massachusetts mandates testing in several categories, including the cannabinoid profile, or the percentage of THC, CBD, and other cannabinoids present, as well as the microbial, agricultural, and manufacturing contaminants. The labs that conduct these tests report them to the Commission's Inventory Management System, or the CDSAIL tracking platform, which tracks all industry data for monitoring and enforcement. The second bullet here outlines the regulated tests we have in Massachusetts. Cannabinoid profile, such as the cannabinoids we all recognize, and we've talked about a lot tonight, THC and CBD, heavy metals or elemental contaminants, such as mercury and lead, Pesticides or chemicals such as insecticides and herbicides that kill, repel, or control forms of animal and plant life considered to damage or be a nuisance in agriculture. Growth regulators, which can improve the crop performance, making the plant architecture more adapted and efficient. And microbial contaminants and mycotoxins or other toxic substances produced by fungus. Residual solvents or organic volatile chemicals that are used to produce in the manufacture of drug substances. And lastly, vitamin E acetate or VEA for vaporizer products only. And this was just enacted after we became aware of it during the e-cigarette or vaping product use associated lung injury crisis, or what we now know today as the Valley crisis. These next few slides are taken from the research department's industry report published actually earlier this year in February, and highlights both policy and research foci on cannabis testing data, both here in Massachusetts and across the US. So data was available for this report specifically from April 2021 through December 2023, so kind of outdated now, for 3 test results, including THC, THCA, and total yeast and mold, or TYM. As we just discuss in a brief reminder that THCA is the molecular precursor to THC. In other words, when cannabis is heated, the THCA becomes THC. Therefore, total THC potency is actually based on the amount of THC and THCA together. This slide shows the counts of reported THC, THCA, and total yeast and mold rates by year. So what does this look like when looking under the proverbial data microscope? And why would regulators and public health officials seek to explore this further? So starting with THC and THCA, you can visually see that Delta-9 THC and THCA are both trending upwards in the data from 2021 to 2023. Abnormally high reported values for THC could appear for several reasons, including data entry errors, decarboxylation in the sampling prior to testing, or potential data manipulation of some kind. This gets complicated because establishing a cause requires more in-depth analysis, including multiple stakeholder collaboration and specifically content and methodological expertise in this area. Similarly, on this slide, you can see that total yeast and mold rates have a distinctive pattern, but this time with decreasing rates. So total yeast and mold results are reported in colony forming units, or CFUs, per gram. The percentage of failing results reported each year has decreased from 10% in 2021 to 7.5% in 2023. To the right is a density plot showing the distribution of results over time. The y-axis is cut off the threshold at 100,000 CFUs per gram here, but we can visually see how the dots change at this threshold, which was obviously a big concern for me and my team as quantitative researchers during the industry report, as these data would not occur by statistical chance. However, further research is definitely needed, including multi-stakeholder collaboration and expertise, such as us in the research team and industry scientists. I'd like to actually take a shout out here to Commissioner Kimberly Roy, Director Ahern, as well as the enforcement and testing teams led by Chief Noam Khaleesi Jones, for their commitment to public health and safety and updating these policies and guidance to reflect these concerns in testing in the state of Massachusetts. If you've been watching, there has been a lot of activity here in the past 12 months, and I know we're not done yet. I know there's a lot to go. So taking a look at the industry overall, we know that marijuana establishments have increased and expanded across the Commonwealth from 2018 to 2024. As of April 2024, when the report data were collected, Worcester County had the highest number of licensees that had commenced operations at 138, followed by Middlesex County at 104. Nantucket County and Dukes County had the fewest establishments at 6 and 4 respectively. But if you know what those places are, those are the Cape and Islands, which aren't necessarily that popular, if not in the summer. So market saturation was calculated by the number of retailers per 100,000 population for each of the Massachusetts counties. Across all municipalities, there were an average of 5.1 marijuana retailers per 100,000 residents. This had large variability across regions, as seen in the table on the right. Saturation of cannabis retailers was highest in the western counties of Berkshire and Hampshire, and was lowest in Norfolk and Middlesex counties. The takeaway here is really that we can't say if the market is saturated or not. That's a debate for economists, but we can see a lot of variation across the state. So it's not really meaningful to think about if the state market is saturated. It's more helpful to think about it by region and by access to adult use versus access to medical retailers across the state. This slide shows sales totals for the adult use market. As seen in the figure on the left, sales from November 2018 through April 2024 totaled just over $6 billion, including a total of $524 million from January through April 2024. If you have seen the messages lately on our social media, we just recently hit over $8 billion in sales, indicating a large demand for this marketplace. Buds accounted for the largest portion of sales across the entire time period. This was followed by vape cartridges and pre-rolls. As we can see in the table of the right, sales each year have continued to increase, although the pace of this increase has generally slowed over time. Year-over-year sales increased most from 2018 to 2019, as we'd expect, by 347% as the industry was just starting up. Note that this is only comparing sales in November and December of these years, as the first adult use retailers opened in November 2018. Year-over-year sales increased at least from 2022 to 2023 by only 5%, and had a slightly larger increase of 7% from 2023 to 2024. The takeaway here is that the adult use market is still growing, though not growing as fast as it once was, especially from 2018 to 2019, which is absolutely not surprising, as it has only existed for 7 years, and the most popular product categories remain consistent over this time span. Now we can look at the price per gram and price per ounce of cannabis flower in the adult use market. As seen in the figure on the left, the price per gram of cannabis flower, calculated as a monthly average, fell from just over $14 in November 2018 to approximately $5 in April 2024. This is a 62% decrease in price. The price per ounce of cannabis flower, shown in the table on the right, similarly fell from just over $400 in 2018 to around only $150 in 2024. Also, again, a 62% decrease. And now, some decreases are expected as the market saturates across the Commonwealth. As the price of cannabis decreases, additional adult use cannabis consumers in Massachusetts may enter the market. However, as more East Coast states implement adult use cannabis legalization, Massachusetts may expect decreases in overall purchases, as out-of-state consumers may no longer cross the borders to purchase here. We're seeing this now a little bit definitely with New York, but Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Maine. The main takeaway here is that prices have gone way down since the market started in 2018, which impacts businesses, but also probably helps move more consumers out of the unregulated market to the regulated market. Now we look at the price per gram and price per ounce of cannabis flower in the adult use market. As seen in the figure on the right, this is the medical market. As seen in the figure on the left, the price per gram of cannabis flower, calculated as a monthly average, fell from just over 15. This is the same thing. I'm so sorry. Sorry about that. So now we'll take a look at registered patients in the medical program. As patients remain a critical cohort for testing standards and safety, and certainly sustain access to safely regulated cannabis products for their varying symptoms and ailments. So as of July 2023, there were just under 100,000 patients with active registrations in the medical use of marijuana program. And this was distributed across the entire Commonwealth, as seen in the figure on the left. The table on the top right displays the number of patients by age group. The largest age group of patients were aged 36 to 45. Less than 6% of patients were under 21 or over age 75. The heat map on the bottom right shows patient distribution and density across the Commonwealth. The takeaway here is that there are patients across the state, and while the numbers have been going down lately, they're probably largely because they shot up during the pandemic closure, when the closure of the adult use retailers happened, as registrations are still higher than pre-pandemic levels. This is shown in Figure 1, where the shaded gray area is when the adult use market closed temporarily from March to May 2020. Notable patterns emerge in patients' qualifying medical conditions. The figure shows the percentage of patients under each diagnosis category on the top and broken down further into age category on the bottom. The most frequently reported qualifying medical conditions were mental or behavioral disorders, and reported by 53% of patients. Prevalence was particularly high among young patients, with about 3/4 of patients under age 21 reporting mental or behavioral disorder. Prevalence declines with each successive age cohort and can be most visibly contrasted with adults aged 75 or older. By contrast, diseases of the musculoskeletal system and connective tissue and cancers were far more common among older patients. However, I will say that mental and behavioral disorders is a huge category where cancers is a lot more specific and more prevalent along obviously older populations who are still warming up to medical cannabis, but still less likely to use it. Really, what we're seeing is that diagnoses by age reflect kind of what you'd expect to see based on one, who is more likely to try medical cannabis, and two, who is more likely to have certain diagnoses such as cancer. At the root of most issues is that policy preceded the science. And while science is kind of chugging along still, due to federal scheduling, it may not catch up anytime soon. There are several challenges and barriers to conducting cannabis and cannabinoid research, including specific regulatory barriers that impede the advancement of cannabis and cannabinoid research. It is often difficult for researchers to gain access to the quantity, quality, and type of cannabis products necessary to address specific research questions on the health effects of cannabis use. A diverse network of funders is needed to support cannabis and cannabinoid research that explores the beneficial and harmful effects of cannabis use. To develop conclusive evidence for the effects of cannabis use for both short-term and long-term health outcomes, improvements in standardization and research methodology, including those in controlled trials and observational studies, are needed. This figure shows the many bureaucratic steps to even be able to conduct research on the cannabis plant legally. And that does not even include the products we have across the 38 states with comprehensive medical programs, but with federally approved cultivators of cannabis for research, which up until recently was only coming from NIDA's Federal Drug Supply Program and cannabis cultivated at one location, which was the University of Mississippi, Ole Miss. If anyone is keeping up with NIDA news, additional DEA-certified manufacturers may expand research access in the future, albeit not in Massachusetts yet. Federal regulations, drug sources, and funding are significant barriers to conducting cannabis and cannabinoid research, which can lead to significant delays in study onset. As depicted by the double-edged arrows here, these challenges are really intertwined with one another, creating a situation where overcoming one obstacle just requires you surmounting to another obstacle. As previously discussed, the massive elephant in the room for everyone in the regulated cannabis space is hemp. and unregulated products, and what the heck to do about them. So a recent study conducted by the Oregon Liquor and Cannabis Commission looked at unregulated and gray market products advertised as hemp available online and found that all 51 samples of hemp flower tested by the Cannabis Reference Laboratory exceeded the 0.3% total THC threshold. In other words, all 51 hemp flower products that the researchers purchased online would be classified as cannabis under federal law. Other scientists, including Dr. Jeff Rawson of the Institute of Cannabis Science, presented very similar findings with Massachusetts unregulated market products at the most recent NECAN meeting. People sometimes send me articles from the media that they see on the media and ask my thoughts, which is never a quick explanation or conversation. There is now a spectrum of research out there, and most of it is not necessarily generalizable to a larger population due to the before mentioned kind of issues. So it takes some time and extra care when evaluating hemp and cannabis studies, especially when it comes out of sound bites from the media. For example, some critical questions to look for. If applicable, where were study participants sourcing their hemp or cannabis? Did the researchers differentiate between regulated and unregulated sources? This is critical for studying public health impacts and youth use. What were the methods of consumption? Was there a basic distinction between inhaling, smoking, or vaping, or other methods, which can lead to different outcomes? What was the amount and frequency of consumption? Did the researchers differentiate between frequent and infrequent use? How large was the sample? Even a well-designed, vigorous study often needs a sample of at least thousands for its findings to be generalizable. Small studies are rarely conclusive, but they can show researchers where to look next. So bringing it back to the work of our small but mighty research team, as noted early on, it is our responsibility under law to provide recommendations based on our research. So what were some of our takeaways thinking about all of these things in the recent industry report? So first, work collaborative with all stakeholders, but especially camera regulators, scientists, experts, industry, and other stakeholders to guide evidence-based practices and policies in this constantly evolving policy and scientific landscape. Implement proactive and regular industry monitoring of abnormalities in the seed to sale tracking system and testing data. Reassess the total yeast and mold TYM threshold for medical and adult use markets, as consumers in each market may have differential risks in cannabis consumption. Work with scientists, experts, and industry to regularly revisit the varying mandated testing components to ensure both cost effectiveness for licensees and public health and safety for consumers. Utilize off-the-shelf testing on our state-run standard testing laboratories to incentivize accuracy and honesty in testing and to provide additional consumer protection. Standardize test result reporting practices to facilitate regulators' understanding of potency and contaminate testing concerns, and allow researchers to quantitatively analyze testing data. In this real-world quasi-experimental design of cannabis legalization and regulation, only time and critical research and monitoring will tell how regulators deal with hemp, cannabis, and testing practices. But I am so grateful to be able to share these concerns and how we have dealt with them in Massachusetts here with you today. I do remain hopeful for evidence-based science in the regulation and implementation of these policies across the US and now world landscape. So thank you again for inviting me here tonight, and a special thanks to my amazing research team at the Commission. I always say they are the real MVPs, as this work is not easy. So thank you, everybody.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Johnson. That was great. Very much appreciate you taking the time. Now I know it's getting a little closer to 9 now, but we still have time for the Q&A. I don't see any questions in the chat yet, but if anyone wants to raise a hand, feel free. Yes, we appreciate all the clapping in the background as well too. I see you over there, Jeff. Love it. I actually have a question for you. Oh man, I was thinking it earlier. I'm gonna have to remember it now. But okay, so you were talking about the different rates of medical patients, for what they're diagnosed with or what their diagnosis that they use based on their age, right? So like mental and behavioral trends more younger, maybe like musculoskeletal or cancer trends more older. And just, you have a background in social, research as well. So I'm curious if you think similar to the stigma with cannabis use in general, and there's also a stigma around mental health issues, right? And I feel like a younger generation, we've kind of learned to be a little more open about that, or it's become possible to be more open about that. So I'm curious, in your opinion, do you think part of that difference is also related to mental health stigma as well as cannabis stigma? So not wanting to get a mental health diagnosis because I'm fine, I don't have this, I'm fine, you know what I mean? For an older group.
Yes, absolutely. I think there's a lot of, the historical stigma. I mean, the prohibition has taken over, most of those their lifetime. And so I do think it is harder. It is amazing to see kind of that jump of older generations jumping into the market and, being interested in asking their providers. I'm sure Dr. Schischler gets this all the time, about just asking, and being interested. And I think that's a first step forward. And I think it's really important to educate, to constantly educate populations about how beneficial these these cannabinoids can be for certain ailments, and really focus on the research and the collaboration, and let people know about this, because it is for some it is a harm reduction, for some of these more serious prescriptions. I'm sorry, my dog keeps barking at me, um but yeah, great question. And I'm so interested to see how this changes over time, especially in other states too, because it has been a huge interest in the older populations now.
Right. Yeah, I imagine states where one, older populations, but two, only having a medical program, that stigma is just that much stronger because you don't just like hear about people using it,
Yeah.
in a recreational kind of way.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. Exactly.
let's see. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. Maybe it's mine and I don't see anything in there, but
So tagging on to that, can I ask a question to tag on?
yes. Yes. Thank
Is there evidence of a change in sort of the uptake or acceptance of uh cannabis among the elderly over time?
That is a great question, and one that would definitely need a social study to kind of figure out. And just basing on the numbers, I would say yes. But obviously we don't know. I'm sure there's studies out there, but fascinating, to kind of see how that goes over time. I think education and the social norms, are really important there. But absolutely. Great to see you, Dr. Ross.
you. I'll say, did you quote him in your presentation?
Yes, I
I think
did.
I saw that name in there.
Because it's so big, because everyone, I mean, the hemp landscape is so huge right now, and we don't have a good scope of it. Every state has different policies, and really is our biggest concern about if people are using, what they're using, how they're using. And as Dr. Roston had pointed out, the accuracy of the testing labels are very different in the regulated versus in the unregulated market. Yes, we still have issues with the regulated market, but they're nothing compared to the unregulated or the hemp space. I think that's really important, especially if Dr. Trishnik probably asked this, this more than me, but if patients are using, hemp products, so they may be more accessible in gas stations or something like that, that's really concerning. You know what I mean?
Yeah, or in their state, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I have relatives in Florida who buy from, yeah, some hemp store, and it makes me crazy.
Yeah, in my experience, is patients don't know the difference, right?
Yeah.
And then they come to me and I explain it to them, and they're like, "Oh my goodness, I never knew," And I think you're right. It's an educational gap, but it's also an educational gap that isn't existing in a vacuum. There are huge industries with a lot of money
Yeah.
pushing the narrative that their marijuana is better and equally safe with everybody else's, or their hemp product. I mean, my good old person Facebook feed is filled with hemp, order your gummies here kind of thing. So I think in some ways we're losing to that effect.
Yeah, and thank you for helping to educate, at a macro level, like why this matters, why it's important. I think that, just pushing the testing and that difference between the regulated, unregulated, like that's essentially why we need regulated markets, right? For that safety, especially for our medicinal patients, who are disproportionately affected. But Craig, I see your hand up, and I definitely want to get to you.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Can you hear me, Doctor?
Yes, absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you. Actually, Dr. Tischler brought up something that I was thinking of as well. I have actually 1,000 questions. But I saw an interesting headline today, which is not uncommon with this administration, but the president said that he's going to reschedule cannabis any day now. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I mean that's been a long time coming under the Biden administration too, and they kind of got stalled when transition of administrations. But yeah, so that would basically change it from under the 1970s Controlled Substance Act from a Schedule 1. So Delta-9 THC is currently scheduled as a Schedule 1, which is the same category as heroin. And in that category, it's like no medical benefits, right? It's the most extreme. Everyone knows it's irrational. And this would transform it to Schedule 3, which would allow more medicinal research and processes. I would like to see it descheduled altogether, but that's just my personal opinion. I think there's still gonna be a lot of loopholes because the DEA is still heavily involved. You still need to be DEA certified, and so we think it's going to be more beneficial than it is. But it is a step. It is a step. But I don't think it's going to be necessarily as big as everyone is thinking.
I think the best explanation for why it happened now is he finally met Kim Rivers, and that's a weed person who he can really identify with.
So we got more of the background there. Yeah, I did just see that too, and it is going to be an interesting year, I think, in cannabis legalization across the board. I know they're trying to, some are trying to close the federal loophole in the Farm Bill, also another thing. So it's really is an exciting, crazy time for cannabis. But when is it? It always is.
So true.
Yeah.
We do have another question in the chat. Question is, do you think chemically extracted hemp products should be legal?
For consumption, no. I mean, without the testing, I mean, they should be similar. If they're going to be legal, they should be tested at similar. If they're going to be for human consumption, we should see similar testing standards and practices for hemp additionally, as we do as cannabis. I think that is the biggest concern. Obviously, the Farm Bill was not meant for human consumption, but industry does its thing. Or capitalism does its thing, and it's now become this huge issue that we can't control. We don't even know the scope of it research wise. And so it does. Like, yes, it could be legal, but it would have to be really regulated, right? We can't have these two markets that are unregulated. These two markets where one is regulated, one isn't, and people are using maybe the cheaper, easier to access hemp products, and cannabis is regulated and safer. So
I think you hit a very important nail on the head there, which is as soon as hemp is legalized and regulated like cannabis, we're talking really about the same plant.
Yeah.
Then all of the economic advantages to the hemp producers go away, levels the playing field, and there's no more discussion, right? I mean, now we're just talking about varying forms of weed, all tested and regulated and sold through the same, and it's no longer two things. And we need that, but it's going to be a big fight because the hemp producers are enjoying their low cost of manufacture at this point.
Yeah. And one big point that I would like to point out is it's the one plant, right? It's one plant, right? To have two different industries for one cannabis sativa plant, I think is crazy, but it's the THC, and they're so smart with it. The THC, by the time it gets used or on the shelf, it's likely cannabis. That hemp product, when it was first tested, could have an amount that's below the 0.3% threshold, but by the time that product reaches the shelves and is consumed, and if it was tested again, it would probably be categorized as cannabis. And so you're fundamentally legalizing cannabis products, but they're not within the legalized jurisdiction and regulated. And this is with the Massachusetts bill that the House proposed. I'm like, this is one plant. Like, we need to treat it as one plant. The novel cannabinoids, I think it makes much more sense. And Jordan Tischer, you're on the forefront of this, is it should be cannabinoids, and focusing on that versus THCA and the acidic precursor and CBD. It really needs to be a novel cannabinoids, because that's where we're at right now.
Right.
That's how it's changed.
I agree with that, and I would just like to add that the challenge with the hemp versus marijuana is that in general, the intoxicating hemp cannabinoids are coming from a different chemical manufacturing process that is more akin to pharmaceutical manufacturing and requires different safeguards. So I agree that our regulations should be agnostic to the ultimate origin, as long as the purity can actually be assured, and assuring that purity and the hazard profile changes if it's chemically synthesized versus sort of like extracted in some sort of artisanal process.
Yeah, exactly.
So those are the distinctions that we need to probably make in our regulations more than 3%, which is not useful.
Yeah. And I don't know about you, but I definitely I would feel more comfortable consuming phytocannabinoids than the synthetics, with everything that we don't know. It's creating different, different hazards that we don't even know about, right? Yet potentially we don't know.
Julia, you just said something I disagreed with for the first time in the whole evening. I don't know that I would agree that the phytocannabinoids are necessarily safer.
Yeah.
It really depends on who's doing it, right? I
Yeah.
mean, if those synthetic cannabinoids come from a reputable source with the appropriate safeguards in place, as Dr. Rawson just said, then we're talking about pharmaceuticals, right?
Exactly.
On the other hand, what we're seeing in the hemp space is more like, Joe's bathtub, gin conversion of CBD, and that's clearly problematic.
That's what I kind of mean. It's like the testing,
totally.
Because there are synthetic cannabinoids in the regulated space, but those are tested, right? And so it's more like the testing that I get nervous about. And yeah, like
100%.
Yeah, there's a comment in the chat that kind of plays on this point, and it says a lot of the chemically derived stuff is essentially legal party drugs, which, for better or worse, yeah, basically.
Yeah, and my concern a lot with it is that youth are actually, without the stipulations, the provisions that make it not look like candy, or we don't have that in the hemp space, so it is in shelves applicable to kids, and kids are getting it, and they don't know what they're getting. Parents don't know what they consume, and parents don't necessarily think like they're going to have intoxicating things on the shelves of a grocery store, not a grocery store, like a gas station or something like that. But that's where we're in, and we're a lot of different states, not as much as Massachusetts, but if you talk to regulators across the US, like it's a big problem.
Oh yeah. I was involved in a case, and we were discussing this morning, of a 15-year-old who essentially went from being a good student to failing out of high school over a number of months, in which he was surreptitiously purchasing 4-gram carts of hemp-derived Delta-8, which were illegal in the state that he was in, but that didn't stop him. And apparently the illegal vape store, where didn't have any more problems selling to a 15-year-old than the dude on the corner, right? So
exactly.
problematic.
Yeah. So there's so much to do. Like I always say, like we'll never go. I mean, like we'll always have research to do because it's constantly evolving. Just when we think we have a handle on it, something else changes. And it's like, all right, here we go. We start again from square one. But yeah, thank you all for having me tonight. It's been a pleasure to be here. I'm sorry that I'm probably exhausted at this time of night, but it was great to be here. And
no, this was excellent.
That.
Thank you so much for this presentation. I got a lot out of it. I'm sure everyone else did. Round of applause for sure. And yeah, I don't see any more questions in the chat, so we can wrap up. Thank you everyone for attending this event. ACS, we're always looking for new members. Please look into it. I know Kelsey put some links in the chat, and hope to see you at our next event. Have a great night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.